Hi, it's Damon Taylor here from Chris the Bride, Wedding Director, and I'm on the phone with Karen Willis Holmes. And Karen's a celebrated wedding dress designer, and we're privileged to have Karen with us today. And during the interview, Karen will discuss wedding fashion, her tips on wedding dresses, and the questions you should be asking when you are buying your wedding dress. If you have some questions for Karen, be sure to ask your questions at the bottom of the blog. So welcome, Karen.
Hello, Damon.
Lovely to have you with us.
And very nice to be asked to be here.
Well, that's all right. So, Karen, before we dive into the world of wedding dresses, tell us about yourself and give us the 2-minute version of how you became a well-known wedding dress designer.
Well, I always loved fashion from when I was very little, but I always loved the big, glamorous, impractical clothes. So I started off in mainstream fashion, but I always sort of focused on evening wear, and I love corsets as well, which of course we incorporate in evening wear as well. So I sort of started off doing that, and then some clients would ask me to make a wedding gown. So I sort of slowly then I did more and more wedding gowns by request, and then decided, well, with my husband actually, who wasn't my husband then, but he suggested why don't I specialise in bridal gowns, and I didn't want to start with because I saw myself more as a fashion designer, not as bridal. But then after he suggested it, I had a thought about it, and it made complete sense. And then as soon as I started focusing on that solely, it suited what I did. It suited my aesthetics. It suited everything I loved about it. But I suppose sometimes you just need a little push in the right direction to realise what you really like to do.
Because your designs aren't just Australian, are they? They're seen all over the world, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, we sell to New Zealand and to Hong Kong as well as Australia. I'm British. I was born in England and came to Australia when I was 19. So that obviously is my design aesthetic without meaning to be. So I actually end up with an awful lot of British clients that either live here or have sort of worked here, or Australian girls going back to live in England. So many of my gowns end up back in the UK. So that's next on the target of where to sell to.
Well, it's nice to have an Australian designer with an international flavour with us then, Karen. So let's start then. In the wedding dress world, what's fashionable at the moment?
Very sheer fabrics, sort of slim fitted shapes, but soft and dreamy. So when you move, they're very floaty. So even though they sort of sit close to your body, when you step away, then the skirt will flute out and float out. So lots of sheer, lots of delicate, very pretty feminine layers with a fitted silhouette underneath.
Right, and what sort of shoes go with your gowns?
Oh, well, as high, something pretty to keep with the keeping, but as high as you can comfortably wear. I don't think you should go that little bit higher because then you can't walk in them or it feels uncomfortable. But generally something fairly simple, because also if they're too beaded, which does look beautiful, they actually can catch on the gown. So it's all about the gown from my point of view. But something pretty strappy can look nice as well, or a peep toe court shoe is my two preferences at the moment.
Karen, that's great advice. You're listening to an interview with celebrated wedding dress designer Karen Willis Holmes. Stay with us as Karen explains how to get the best wedding dress for your wedding. Now, Karen, what body shape style options do brides have these days?
I would say every body shape's catered to. I mean, a very sort of fitted fishtail is a very fashionable or desired look at the moment. So, but you do need a good figure for that. It's going to show your whole figure off. But then if you sort of want something like that, or you've got sort of like a smaller waist, usually you have a bit bigger hips, like an A-line, so a bit softer over the hips, still complements some kind of tapes from that. Or if you're very sort of straight up and down, a bias gown can look beautiful. That sort of adds a little bit of curve to it. And a fishtail does work well on a fairly straight up and down sort of boyish figure, because then if you've got a corset in there, you're sort of adding curves to it as well. We can always do a bit of enhancement in the bust area quite easily with all the wedding gowns. So whatever size bust you are, it doesn't matter. Strapless is popular again, so if you have a larger bust, but if you're purchasing one of our gowns, there's a lot of bust support in there. And I suppose as well, if you're a straight up and down figure but a little bit larger, something that sits close to your body. A full-ish but not too full skirt complements and looks pretty and shows your figure off nicely. And a V-neck looks good with a larger bust to sort of use it and show the bust without sort of looking too matronly and too covered up as well.
You mentioned something about a fishtail. Explain to me what that is, Karen.
That is very fitted on the waist, fitted on the bodice and fitted on the waist, but coming into a very fitted skirt below the hips and coming into the knees and then fluting out quite quickly. So you're getting a very dramatic, very feminine silhouette.
Nice, thank you for explaining that. Now, Karen, should brides be looking at any wedding accessories with a particular dress?
We like a lot of sort of flowers. I mean, we make a lot of silk flowers. They can just look beautiful, and they do suit all the soft feminine gowns at the moment. Also, some sort of like diamantes in the hair can look very pretty. I always love veils, generally a veil, but if you don't want to do a veil and you want it a little bit more contemporary, a fascinator can look very pretty. Sort of like, again, using flowers. Flowers are the big thing at the moment. Accessorising with flowers, whichever way, is the way to go, whether they're sort of making a strapless gown but with one shoulder with flowers, flowers in the hair, flowers on the hips, flowers on the waist. As a little finishing touch is very popular with pearl or sort of diamante earrings is the most popular items that we will be selling at the moment. And that, like I said, that just complements the look of the gowns that we're working.
And are fresh flowers better to use?
They look pretty. They also mean, I like the silk flowers because you just pop them in and you do not need to worry how long it's going to last. Fresh flowers can look stunning as well. I suppose my preference is the silk flower. Depends what flowers you're having as well in your bouquet if they're going to work in your hair. The thing with a silk flower as well is it's much more flexible, so you can kind of bend it and move it, plus you can have it made whatever size. So that's my preference, is a silk flower. A beautifully made silk flower, of course, though, not just any old silk flower. Looks good.
Thanks, Karen. You're listening to an interview with celebrated wedding dress designer Karen Willis Holmes. So stay with us as Karen explains how to get the best wedding dress for your wedding. Now, Karen, this is not quite a wedding question. Well, it is, but it's something that's always intrigued me. All brides wear a wedding dress, but what's the history and significance of a white wedding dress?
I think it was Queen Victoria wore white, and then since then before that it wasn't worn. But I think you couldn't really afford it if you were a normal person, I suppose. It's more expensive to have white, and also it's become known as a virginal colour, whether that's definitely not really relevant in today's day and age, but that sort of seems to be still part of the history and the feeling of it as well. It's but Queen Victoria apparently, there's always lots of different reasons who and what, but that seems to be which is only sort of just over 100 years ago that white has been a traditional colour for wedding gowns. Having said that, we make very few gowns in actual white. We use ivory mostly, and many other places do as well. It's a modern white.
So ivory is just a modern white, or is there any other reason why ivory is used?
Generally it's more flattering on more skin types. And if you're not, I suppose also I'm talking from a bridal designer, so I'm kind of knowing all my whites and ivories and the little different versions of shades. So a silk fabric actually won't go into a bright white. You can have a white silk, but normally we call it silk white. Because it's a natural fabric, it doesn't go pristine white. To go a serious white, it has to be a man-made, it has to be a polyester. And that's actually not that flattering on most girls' skin tone. An ivory just looks softer and sort of adds a little bit of warmth rather than the white can be a bit harsh. When white looks beautiful, it definitely looks beautiful. And it usually suits tanned girls. A blonde tan girl looks the best in a white. All
right, Karen, look, thanks for that. Now, how much should brides be budgeting for a wedding dress these days?